Today we're going to do this beautiful, beautiful, I think it's the sunset of the Cowichan Valley, I think, at dusk. Those who live in the Cowichan Valley can correct me if it doesn't look like this. We're going to go a bit more blue. So Connie's beautiful photo, very grey, lovely, lovely shades of grey. And if you really love that monochrome look and the greys, you can go grey, but I'm going to go more blue. And we're going to work a little bit differently to last week. Now, last week we wet just the sky to the horizon. Now, we don't have a straight horizon here, so we have to wet the whole background because otherwise we're going to get a line. Wherever your paint and water stops, you get a line. Doesn't matter how you try to avoid that. So we try to avoid it by wetting everything. Now, a couple of pointers before we start. We're going to mix up the colors before we start. We're going to do blue and orange at the same time. Now that can be very tricky because blue and orange make grey, and if they touch we can get a bit of grey, but that's okay up here, this lovely little subtle grey up here. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with the cerulean blue, and we're going to leave big white spaces for these pinky orange clouds. So these are going to be spaces that we leave. And when we put the orange on here, we're going to leave a white space. Now it will blend into the water and you won't really notice it and you won't get that grey. And then we're going to bring the orange down and gently just become water coming down here. So we don't have too much orange. We can have orange showing through here, but we want to dilute it as we come down. When we come back up to do these little clouds up here, we're just going to add a little bit of rose to the orange. So they're a bit more rosy. And the rose and the blue will make a lovely color rather than the orange and blue will be more gray. So there's some things to really remember and put in your mind before we start. And the first thing we need to do is mix up some colors. So I'm going to move my painting out of the way and I'm going to bring my blue tray over. And the first color I want is some cerulean blue for the sky. So I'm going to mix that up first. I have a feeling that I'm forgetting something, and I just hope I'm not. You know that little nag in the back of your mind that you're forgetting something? Please let me know if I've forgotten anything. So I've got some cerulean blue. I don't want it too thick, but also I have to remember that if I have water on the paper first, that cerulean is going to be much lighter. So I want enough paint that I've got some blue. And then we want some orange. Let's move this out of the way. I'm going to use my transparent orange again, but you can use whatever orange you would like to use. You can, if you have a transparent orange or a pyrrole orange is very similar, you can use that if you want to. If you don't, I have a lovely bright Azo Yellow, and I can mix that with some Quinacridone Rose to make an orange, a nice rosy orange. That's lovely. I can mix it with some cadmium red to make an orange. This is my preferred mix if I have to mix an orange, is cadmium red and an Azo Yellow, because they're a bit more transparent. So that's kind of good too. I'm trying to think. Oh, I have this lovely Indian yellow from Daniel Smith. I don't know what other brands there are, but honestly, the Daniel Smith Indian yellow is absolutely gorgeous. I never want to be without it now that I've discovered it. So bright, so transparent, so gorgeous. And I'm going to mix that with a little bit of cadmium red. And that will make a lovely, lovely bright orange too. So we've got some choices. If you don't have transparent orange, that's fine. I'm also going to put a little bit of that transparent orange in this mix and a little bit of Quinacridone Rose in there, just for when I want those kind of rosy clouds that I'm going to put in last. And I might need a bit more orange. Got quite a bit of sky to cover. I don't know if you've made yours rectangular or wide. It doesn't matter which one. I'm going to do one of each at each class. The photo was just a rectangular photo. I stretched it out for the wide one. I'll get my trays out the way and get my painting back over here. Right, I think we can just about get it all on camera. Okay. And the first thing I've got to do is take a big brush, clean water, and wet the whole paper. I think I'm going to grab my nice big square brush for that. It'll get through it quickly and it holds lots of water. So I always like to go side to side, especially on a horizontal painting. Oh, you know what I forgot to do? I forgot to turn my... I knew there was something I'd forgotten to do, didn't I? I forgot to turn the light on. The light helps eliminate shadows, this desk light. Proper filming light. So there, that's what I forgot to do. Your mind nags you, doesn't it, until you remember what it is you forgot. I can also see better now I've got the light on. That's what helped. So I'm making sure everything is wet. I'm going to tip it, make sure. And spread the water out evenly. It takes about a minute for the paper to start absorbing the water because you have to get through that sizing on the paper that's designed to slow down the water absorption. And I'll put that brush to one side and I'm going to work with my number 10. And I'm going to put the Cerulean Blue on first in this top corner, and I've got to remember I have to leave some space for the little orangey pink cloud. So we've got the corner here, and remember if your paper's wet, your paint will melt into your wet paper, so you have to be really careful that when you put your Cerulean Blue on, your brush isn't too dripping with water and your Cerulean Blue isn't too drippy. Otherwise it'll just go and you'll have blue everywhere. So I'm actually going to put my painting up in front of me so I can have a little look at what I did. And I'm going to sweep from the side, and I'm sweeping with my brush how I want the sky to come in here a little bit, leaving that white for the... I'm going to ignore the line for the mountain because I don't want to have a weird line going through anything. And I've actually swept the blue up quite a long way towards the right hand corner. So there we go. A nice, really nice diagonal going right across. And it's sort of, I'm emulating what's happening here, this sky going along here, which is a little bit more subtle in the photo. I'll wash all of that paint out of my brush or switch to a cleaner one because we're going to the orange now. And I dry my brush after I do that. I don't just wash and drip everywhere. I dry it a little bit. And now I want the transparent orange. And I'm not going to worry about these clouds up here for the moment. I'm going to go right over the trees and everything else. And over the mountains, and see I'm leaving a little bit of white space so I don't get that grey happening. I think I actually said to mix up some Azo Yellow and I probably forgot that. I'm in a bit of a forgetful mood today, aren't I? I'm going to grab a little bit on the fly. And I'm going to put a bit of yellow in with that orange. I actually can't remember if I think I put that in my notes. I can check in a minute, but I still want to have some more orange definitely behind these trees and behind this mountain here. And then because I wet all the way down the paper, I'm going to take my very, very watery light orange, and I'm watering it down as I get closer to the edge through there so I don't get any distracting lines. Now I feel if your paper's still wet, you can go back with a bit more colour. I want a bit more colour in the sky. And my paper's starting to dry, so I want to do the one that has a little bit of rose in it. And before my paper's too dry, I want to scud these clouds in here. And I'm taking a little bit more pink, tiny bit more pink on my fairly dry brush. And just in a very diagonal motion, just putting a little bit of pink into that orange. Now it's really important when you have wet paper that you don't have a brush that's too wet. Otherwise you'll get those big blooms of water all over your painting. Backgrounds they're called. And I'm just, this is starting to dry, so I've got a lot more control. I'm just putting a little bit more pinky orange in there onto the white that I left, just softening that in with my brush. I put a little tiny bit on top of the blue because I can have like a sort of a grey transition. And then I don't want to fiddle too much, because you know what, the more I fiddle, the more likely it is I'm going to have some kind of a disaster happening. So let's just pull back a bit so you can see the full thing. All you can see now, all you can focus on now is the sky. So it looks like, whoa, too much sky. But once you get all the blue in, the colors, the silhouettes, all of this sky will kind of fade into the background, and it's also going to fade as it dries. So you might feel you've overdone it, but don't worry about that. It'll be fine once it's dry, and once you get all those dark colors in. Is make sure my tape is dry, because I am getting a slight little bleed back here on the top corner. And before I go on, this does all have to be dry, but I don't want to rush to the hairdryer right now. I want this to blend, I want it to soak in, and the colors will keep moving until the water's evaporated. So I'm just going to let that do its thing. I'll zoom in a little bit more. So our next stage is to paint the lightest mountain back here. So exactly how we did it last week and the first week, every layer has to be painted right down to the bottom so that we don't get any straight lines or any weird lines behind. So we're going to paint this first range of distant mountains with just cerulean blue, quite diluted. We don't want it too light, but we have to take the color all the way down to the edge here, so that we don't get any weird lines behind the layers. And we don't want the cerulean blue too dark. Oh, let's not do that. Let's put something. You know, I lose all my coverings. Here we go. I just want to put that in front of that while I mix up some cerulean blue. So again, I'm going to use my number 10 brush. I don't want my brush to be too small, and I don't want my paint to be too thick either, because I want it really light. So I'm going to test that. See, it's quite watery, and I need quite a bit because I got quite a bit to cover. I'm going to test it. Okay, I'm going to test it over a bit of orange. See what we've got. We've got a grey happening. I might need a little bit more paint added. You can always water it down as you go. That will work. And as you start, you can kind of make that decision now. Since my second range of mountains will end up being darker than my first, it's not too scary to start there and see what we've got. And that looks all right to me. You need a big brush so that you can get the tip of that big brush into that lovely edge of your mountain range and push your brush down to the belly so that you can get right down to the bottom without any lines happening. So I want to be very careful as I go along the top of this mountain range. But I don't want anything to dry before I get down here, because I'll have a big dry line through everything if that happens. Now you can't see too well where the mountain goes behind the trees, so I invented that based on what I've got in the photo so far. It's not too critical because the trees are going in front of it, and I want to get down to the tape. But do not go back and start with wet paint over here again. That is a recipe for disaster. Get that on and then put your brush down and leave it alone. I know that is the hardest thing to do. Believe me, I still want to go back and fiddle on paintings, but you've got to stop, put your brush down. And you should be able to see, if you've got the right consistency of paint, you should be able to see all of your pencil lines through it easily. And it should be pretty light. You should be able to see some of your sunset lines maybe through it. That won't be distracting when you're finished. If you can look at the photo, we can see that kind of pinky orangey mist through here. So that's sort of what we're aiming for, to be able to see that through the blue. The one thing you can do is, if you can find your piece of Kleenex that you had, is to just make sure you haven't got any wet paint that's going to come back into your painting. Now this was done on dry paper. I dried it with the hairdryer. Now let's move it straight for you there. So that's just Cerulean Blue mixed with quite a lot of water, so it's pretty light, not very strong. And one layer, big brush. I use my number 10 brush for that. And I will use it for the next layer too. Each layer is going to get progressively darker as we come forwards, and progressively bluer and warmer. So Cerulean Blue is a cool blue because it leans a little bit more towards green on the color wheel. We're going to add Cobalt to it for the next layer. Now Cobalt is warmer because it's more towards the violet on the color wheel. And then we'll be adding some Ultramarine Blue, which is a really warm blue, closer to violet. And as we get closer and closer, there'll be a little bit more rose in the mix, so it is much closer to violet. And use my big brush to mix. I've got my Cerulean Blue here. I'm going to add a little bit of water, a little bit more Cerulean Blue, and a little bit of Cobalt Blue to warm that blue up. I don't want to go too much darker because I'm going to have two layers which will make it darker anyway. I just wanted a little bit warmer. And I grabbed my test paper and I'm going to see what that's like. And I think I could go slightly warmer. I'm going to take a little bit more Cobalt. Yes, I think that's good. I don't want it too, I still want it nice and transparent. We're still into transparent and definitely not as dark as the photo. It's going to have the orange. You can see on this one, it's got orange behind it, so that really darkens it up anyway. Move this back and find my painting again. Get it straight. There we go. Oh, and you know what? I have to dry this. We can't go on to the next layer with it wet. So while you're catching up, I'm going to dry mine. And you'll need to dry, before you do the next layer, it can't just be a bit damp. It has to be dry. So I'm going to dry mine. It won't take long to dry. It's on dry paper. There we go. Now paper will get very soggy very quickly if you don't dry perfectly between layers. And then the paper will start to pill and the paint will start to look very dull. Going with my big number 10 brush still, I'm going to not paint this mountain in the background here, all along here. I'm going to start here with this second range here. And again, dipping, remember, you've got to dip into your paint really often. Now this back mountain does have a little bit of tree poking up, so it's not too obvious. I am going to do just a few. I have to work quickly because if I don't, I'm going to be working up against dry paint, which is not going to look good. I got to remember, don't paint this back one. And quickly down to the edge. Now, even as I said that, even as I realized I had to do that, you can see right here my first brush stroke was drying as I put the second brush stroke on, because I was fiddling about up here. So you have to be so quick to get these layers on without seeing the wet paint against the dry paint or making a mistake with your brush strokes. And the Cerulean Blue is a little bit granulating, so it doesn't give you much leeway. Fortunately, I'm going to have a lot of other paint over this, so it won't be too noticeable. Let it soak in. I'm going to skew it off, not straight. Let it soak in a bit, and then I'm going to dry with the hairdryer. And this really, 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 you can see it as this stays wet here, and this was fairly dry. And you saw how quickly I worked. I just worked a bit too slow there, or a bit too dry. It gives a lot of nice texture. I think when I get to the the third layer, I'm going to get rid of the Cerulean Blue and work with the other blues, because it is a granulating color and it will keep adding to the granulation. I'm looking where I am in the painting. Okay. So here's my Ultramarine Blue. Water on my tray first, and then my Ultramarine Blue, because you want your paint to flow. And I want a fair bit. I'm going to use Ultramarine Blue in the next layer too, so I can mix up a fair amount. I'm going to put just a tiny touch of rose in it. It'll probably be, as I say, it'll probably be too much, but I don't think it will be. It's just to start going into that sort of violet range of blue rather than the cooler blues that we've had. Try one more touch of rose to it. Maybe a little bit more ultramarine. The change on her photo of those three grays, sort of blue grays, very, very subtle. So we don't want it too overpowering until we get to the next range, I don't think. Adding a bit more water. And keeping it nice and subtle. And it's never going to be like the one I did a few months ago, because I've really sort of forgotten what I did. And even if I try and recreate it, it never really sort of happens the same way. I'm just going to test that. Yeah, that's good. So this layer I'm using now is Ultramarine Blue with just a very small touch of rose in it, just to warm it up. And rose is very, very strong, so you have to be careful that we're not into the purple yet. The next layer can be a little bit more purple. I'm going to do, I've put this wet paint on here, so if I'm not careful, it's going to dry up and trip me up. So I am going to go into the next layer, and I'm going to have my little number 4 brush ready, because I do want to, oh, what's it got on it? Might have something gross on it, like black paint or something. I do want to have some little treetops here. And see, I've stopped here, and it's really dangerous to do that. So when you do stop, it's kind of important to make sure you've got really wet paint down. And connect quickly. Having a few more treetops kind of shows that this area is closer. That's good for perspective. We're going to have another darker layer coming over the top of this, so that's why we don't have to be too fussy about the bottom. We're going to have darker trees coming over it. I am going to put just a little bit more happening at the top here. Now the next layer is going to have much more in the way of treetops, because it's going to be much, much closer. And of course the Ultramarine Blue that I've just used is also a granulating colour. So there might be some granulation happening. Let that soak in. And fortunately that has pretty much covered my boo-boo there where I had the dry and the wet paint. And I'm going to have a much, much darker layer as well, so we should be good. I'm also going to add a little bit of the Indanthrone Blue, because it goes dark without being granulating. And I didn't have any when I did this first painting. So a little bit more colour, this ultramarine, and a little bit of Indanthrone, and then a little bit of rose. Grab some rose. Want to purple it up a little bit more than the previous layer and have a little bit more pigment in there so it's not so watery. And test that out. Having a little think. I might put a bit more rose in there. And a bit more Indanthrone Blue. If you don't have Indanthrone, just go with your ultramarine, even a little bit of Payne's grey if you want to darken it up a little bit. That will work. I don't want this layer to be too dark, but I want it to be quite a bit darker. It needs to have some coverage. This is my Payne's grey here. I'm just going to grab a little bit and add a little bit to that. and see what I get. So I think a little bit of Payne's grey, because it does get a bit grayer as it comes towards us. Or if you have the indigo, I'm going to add indigo to the next layer. That looks fairly good. I think that's going to be okay. So what we're working with now is we're working with this layer here, which is much, much darker than all these back layers and not as dark as the silhouette layer. So we want something that, and it's sort of grayish in this picture and sort of purplish. And the purple and the yellow is going to be lovely together, the blue and the orange lovely together. So we're working with complementaries too. And in the one that I did here, it was the ultramarine and the rose, and I think maybe a little bit of Payne's grey to go sort of a purplish blue, and much, much lighter than the photo. So it's up to you, you know, it's what effect you want to get as well. I'll pop my paint over there, put this down, and of course I have to, now mine's soaked in, and I can dry. I'm going to dry that quickly. Make sure it's not damp. I haven't done anything subtle like sort of putting on the color and then diluting it with water, because that's a really, really tricky thing to do. And sometimes you get those back runs that are a little bit difficult to deal with. But maybe in this layer, I will try that. There's a little place here where you can see that through the trees where I've sort of diluted it down with water a little bit. So it's kind of misty in here. And I think I did that here too. And you don't have to do that if you feel it's going to be too tricky for you. And it is tricky because the water can back run into the paint and just give you a bloom. Or it can dilute your paint too much and it can be not dark enough. So I've kind of just gone with straight washes at this point. I do just want to mention that because it is something you can do to make it more misty and more atmospheric. Now I think my number 10 brush is getting a bit big now. I'm moving into a smaller space. I'm going to use the 8 and still have the number 4 on hand for the treetops because we've got some bigger treetops happening here. And I know that a lot of you are not ready yet, so I'm going to give you time. I'm just going to wait for you. So don't rush. Okay, so I'm going to start working across this layer, this quite dark layer, because it's the same procedure. But when I get to just here, I'm just going to add a bit of water to have that kind of that misty look, hopefully anyway. So I'm going to roll my number 8 brush in the dark mix. I got plenty, and remember, dip into that mix frequently. I'm going to check if it's dark enough. I'll look at my other one. I think I might just add a little bit more Payne's grey to it. Get my number 4 brush. It's already drying up here, so I'm going to put a bit more paint there to work with. And then get the treetops in, remembering that these treetops have a lot more shape. I got to work wet. The paint has to be wet or you won't have time to work. Stop with wet paint and as quickly as you can get those treetops in. You can come back and add a little bit more detail later, and I'll show you what I mean by that when I get there. But I need to work across fairly quickly. Remembering to go up and down because we don't want it to be too regular. Now I'm going to get to the danger zone and put the treetops in first, but I'm going to go now with a wet brush. I'm going to add a little bit of, oh look, it picks up the blue underneath too much. Well, we'll work with that. I put a little bit of water on there to try and mist it out underneath. Get my brush, try and work that into like a mist here. That's why I say it's quite a dangerous thing to do, because it's very tricky putting water on and then paint and just trying to get that misty look. Bring the paint down into that water a little bit. Water on my brush. Bring the paint down into the water a little bit just to kind of get, I don't want to do that too much because the paint underneath is lifting too much, so we won't play with that idea too much. It's very dry here and then wet. It's very hard to keep everything the correct wetness when you're doing this, so do be careful. Now what I meant about going back and putting some detail in is I'm taking my tiny brush and I'm not going back into the wet paint down here, but I am going to put a little bit more detail on the top of some of these trees. I can do that after I've gone all the way along, made sure that I've got along here quick as I can. Because if I stop along my way to put all this detail in, everything's really going to dry up way too quickly. I'm just putting a few little, branches. Can see a bit more of the tree sometimes. A few little dots here and there. Tree that's a bit more bushy. See a bit more of this one. Now this sort of misty effect that I was going for here is going to work because I'm going to have the silhouettes in front of that, so it will look, even though it looks a bit messy right now, it will look misty once I get the silhouette in front. And there's going to be a big tree over that, so I'm not going to fuss about that too much. And of course that needs to soak in, and then it needs to be dry before I work on my silhouette layer. Very interesting that this area here is still very wet and this is really dry here. Just shows you, unless you're really careful with your grabbing your paint and using a brush, it's very easy to get that wet against dry problem. But I am quite happy with how the mist is actually working. What I did have problems with was the water. Even though I had dried the ultramarine blue layer with the hairdryer, the water actually was lifting the ultramarine blue. It hadn't got grabbed into the paper. But no matter, it's going to make a nice mist there, so no worries. Now, I hardly ever draw the last layer in because I can't see it through this dark layer anyway. And I want it to be more natural. I don't want to be able to see the pencil lines through the trees. So when I do the next layer, apart from the tree here and a bit of the outline of this tree, I'm going to have my reference photo in front of me and the one that I did before to really kind of follow the up and down and the shape of the trees. It doesn't matter if you don't get it bang on. It's just a few little things that are important. So about almost a third of the way in, there's this tree that goes over this layer, this dark layer, into the lighter layer. That's really important to have that happen. And it is, it's a little less than 1/3. Like in a perfect composition, it'd probably be a bit more close to 1/3, but it's right between 1/4 and 1/3 here. And sort of where this valley dips, mine dips about here. That's where, and this peaks. See, this one peaks and this one dips. That's where that tree is going to go in. I haven't drawn it in, but if you feel that you're going to miss it, you can do a little, a little pencil mark just where you want the top of that tree to be to remind you. The next one that sort of breaks that line is just about here, before we get to the branches of this tree. And there's also a deep, after this goes up and a couple more, there's quite a deep valley in these trees here. So I want to make sure that I don't forget that deep valley. I've got a tree that goes up here, and I'm going to bring my valley over a little bit. Just put a V here, because I want that kind of mist to be in that valley too. And just before you go down in that valley, this tree here, you can see the tree trunk of that one. You can't see the tree trunks of most of them, but you can of this one. There's a couple of trees. Some of them can be just generic treetops, but this one, this one, this one, this one, they're all kind of got their own shape. Don't forget here, there's a bit of a V too, sort of just before these branches. So my branches come to here. So I'm just going to remind myself, there's a bit of a V there. So I remember to do the pattern of the trees as I'm going along. And I've got to make sure this is really, really dry. Again, because these colors can lift, they're liftable colors, so I want them really dry when I put the next layer on. I'm going to go to my hairdryer again and read the chat. Oh, there's a chat here. Oh, so Jill asked, with multiple washes, she asked, is there any effect on the sizing? There will be a little bit, Gil, because every time you wet the paper and use water and friction from the brush on the paper, you're going to remove a little bit of sizing. Now, the great thing about Arches paper, and I don't know much about other papers because I only use Arches paper, they internally size and externally size their paper. That means that when they make the pulp mix, the cotton linters and the water, they put sizing, a gelatin sizing, in the water with the cotton linters and the pulp mix. So the sizing is internal to the paper. Then they make the paper on rollers these days. And after that is made, then they do the front and the back with sizing as well. Again, a gelatin sizing, probably some gum arabic and some gelatin. They used to use a lot of animal products in their gelatin ash because you could smell it. 30 years ago, when I first bought ash paper, when you got it wet, it had a fishy smell because what they make the gelatin from is fish bones, animal bones, horses' hooves, all kinds of stuff. And it did have a very animal smell. Now, I think these days there's a real push for less animal and more organic things like seaweed and stuff in gelatin. So you don't have that smell as much with the ash paper. So I think it is probably more plant-based. In Japan, for the washi kozo paper, they use a special root that they boil up for their sizing. Forgotten what the root is, but it's all plant-based, and they boil up the root until they get this gelatin, and that's what they make the beautiful washi kozo paper with. If somebody knows what the root is or can remember, you can tell me. I've forgotten. But yes, so you don't have to worry too much with if it's ash paper, because the internal sizing will help you. But as you wet the paper, as you put the paint on, you do remove a bit of the external sizing. So it can make it a little bit more delicate. And if you use too much water, that's when your paper starts to break down. You'll use a lot of your external sizing and your paper can go a little bit transparent and pulpy, and it'll even start to pill on you. So you do have to be gentle. Even when I've stretched my paper, I've soaked it in cold water and then taped it down to stretch it so it stays flat. Even then, if you're soaking your paper in cold water, 3 minutes is your maximum, because you can start to dissolve the gelatin if you leave it for longer than that. I only leave mine in a few seconds. I just make sure it's completely wet back and front and tape it down. Never use hot water, because the hot water will, like if you're making jello, it will dissolve the gelatin. So, and never hot water with your paints. But if you're gentle with all the time with your brush, we're not using too much water, with drying between layers, you should have enough sizing left to do your painting correctly. That's a good question, especially when we're putting this many layers on. Really good question. Thanks for that. Okay, I am going to mix up the dark silhouette color for the final layer. And now I definitely want to add some indigo, or if you don't have indigo, Payne's gray to this. We want to darken it right up. And this is where you want more pigment. Less water, more pigment, but that doesn't mean dry. You still have to have wet paint, which means adding 3 or 4 brush loads of water. It just means you've got to have a lot more pigment in the paint. It still has to be wet. So some ultramarine blue, some Indanthrone Blue, some indigo. See how I'm adding pigment, but it's still got to be wet. I'm adding a bit more water, a little bit of Payne's gray. We want it nice and dark. I'm going to add a little bit of the Quinacridone Rose to warm up the dark, and some of the transparent orange. I'm making my paints a little dirty now. A bit more indigo. Now the Indanthrone Blue that I discovered, it's not as granulating as the Ultramarine Blue, so it will be better for the final layer. I've got to test how that looks over the dark layer, and that looks fine. Nice and dark. It should look dark on your palette, but it should move. Like if you tip your palette, look, it moves. It's got to be liquid but full of pigment. And as you work, it may dry up a bit, so you're probably going to have to add a bit more liquid, a little bit more pigment as you work. to make sure that it's still going to be nice and fluid for you to paint with. I'm going to add a little bit more Quinacridone Rose and transparent orange. Pretty much just, you know, all the colors that we've used, except for we don't want the Cerulean Blue in there. That's too cool and granulating. We don't need the Cobalt, it's not strong enough, but we can bung everything else in there. And that will give us a lovely, lovely, vibrant dark. Right. Let's move that back over here. Now, before we go into the next layer, remember there is that twiggy tree that is going to be very difficult to do unless you're pretty handy with a tiny brush. And you may love using a tiny brush like a 0 or a 000, or my friend Judy Hopewell gave me these brushes for my birthday. Look at how interesting this brush is. It has a thick part here to hold loads and loads of paint, and it has a thin part, quite stiff thin part here for doing very thin lines. I never used one of these before, and I'm not extended point, it says it's called. Let's grab a bit of paint. So the thing is, you know, you can roll this brush in the paint to fill it up with paint so that it doesn't dry up too quickly. And just like a pen, the paint will slowly flow down into the tip so that you can keep drawing thin lines without running out of paint, because it's flowing down from that fat body of the brush. Now my lovely friend Judy gave me a whole set of these. This is the thinnest one, which I've hooked out for maybe doing some of the branches. It is still quite thick though. As I pulled it this way, I was able to get slightly thinner strokes, but if I try and go the other way, like doing the branch direction, I can't get them quite as thin. So I've got other brushes here. I've got my favorite, which is my 2/0 script liner. Again, I can roll that in the paint. Nice and long, lovely for doing the branches. And if you start off, say this is the tree trunk here, and you start off close to the tree trunk, you're going to have more paint on your brush. But as you pull out away from the tree trunk and lift the brush slightly, you're going to have less and less paint, so you can get thinner and thinner. I love the liner brush for doing tree branches. There's that one. I have a 000 sable brush, which I don't find as good for that because it doesn't hold very much paint, but it is good for, it's still not as thin as the script liner, but if I want to do those splushy sort of needles or leaves that are on the tree, this little 000 is quite good for that. I have that handy. Other things you can use, pens. I have a huge selection here. I don't know why I buy so many pens. Ridiculous. I used to use these micron pens. I have them in all sizes. This is a 005, the very thinnest one that they make, and that makes a beautiful thin line. So if you're at the top of your tree and you want to have those very, very thin branches at the top, a pen like this is perfect. Just recently I have been buying the stapler liners because I find the tips are way more durable on the watercolor paper. The watercolor paper does wear the tips out really, really quickly. All of these pens are waterproof so that I can paint over them if I need to. They're also archival. Now here's the difference between a Sharpie, nice cheap serviceable Sharpie. The Sharpie's quite thick, but you could still get quite a nice thin line with the Sharpie. But the Sharpie has ink in it, and ink fades in UV light, in sunlight. So your Sharpie will eventually fade to brown, to yellow if it's in sunlight, and can always disappear on the paper eventually. It's not archival. That's why they're cheap and cheerful. If you have it in a sketchbook, it's always going to be there. These pigment inks are stable in UV light. They do not fade, and that's why they're called archival. So they are much more expensive. I think these are $5 and something each, but I love these Staedtler ones. They last so much longer than all the other pens, and they don't wear out as quickly. So I've switched to these, but if you have a micron pen, this is a 08, much thicker, tips already wearing out. Another thing I have here, love this little Platinum Preppy pen. They're only about $12, and I fill it with carbon ink. And carbon ink is waterproof. I don't know if it's archival. I haven't looked that up. Probably not, because it's probably an ink. Anyway, but if you have a pen like that, fine, lovely. Got these ones in Walmart, Le Pen. They're quite good. They're waterproof. Pigment ink, so again, it should be archival. And my other one that I love is this Herbin pen. I've filled, this one is a ballpoint pen, but you fill it yourself. And I filled this one with watercolor ink. And it's a lovely rollerball pen. Really like this Herbin pen. Jacques Herbin. Or Urbin, I guess. Urbin. Probably don't pronounce the H. Very, very easy to fill yourself. You can fill it with any type of ink. And I have some lovely colored watercolor inks. Beautiful. And I've had this filled with watercolor ink for 3-4 years now. Never dries up. Never ever dries up. Some pens do when you fill them with ink. Same with these lovely little Platinum Preppy pens, or Platinum pens. Lovely waterproof carbon ink in it. Never dries up. Always ready to take out and use for sketching. So you've got a lot of choices for your tree. Just wanted to go over all those choices. If you find that doing the thin branches are too tricky with the paintbrush. Right, let's get this back up here again. Right, this is our final stage. And I'm wondering why I can't see it. It's because I zoomed in for the pen lecture. I have way too many pens. I have so many I can't even find them when I need them. It's an addiction, I think. Right. Okay, so we need a slightly smaller brush. I think I'm going to get my number 6 out because I want to do quite a bit of 6 and 8 on hand. I want to do quite a few detailed treetops, and I want to look at my picture as I go. And also, don't forget, you want to go up with that tree. So if you have a copy of the photo anywhere close, refer to it. So I'm going to do a treetop, and then come down fairly quickly because I don't want to have lines in my wash. I might even have my number 4, might be easier. Really hard to know what one to use actually, because I want to get to the next treetop here. Sometimes it's good not to connect your branches. Leave holes between them. Leave some lovely space. You know, you don't need a tree trunk through everything, and you don't need to connect. Do you want me to zoom in a little bit so you can see what I'm doing a little better? You know, like sometimes you can just not connect all these bits up here, and that gives a lovely open look to it. So close to, there's a tree like that, a tree like that, and then in my photo that I have right beside me, there's a bigger tree here. I like to start at the top of the tree. And of course, as they come down close to the tape, they all just connect together. You don't have to do every single branch that you see. You just need to get some good treetops in. And make sure you have those heights different as you come along. Dip in every time you do a tree. I dip into my paint every time I do another tree. Now we've had all these sort of little trees here going along. Dip in, dip in, dip in again. Now we're getting to, there's the big tree here, and then there's quite a big one next to it. So the big one next to it comes to about here. So I'm going to put that in. And then there's the big tree that comes over in the middle of this that I put my little pencil mark here. And you can see a lot, if you look at the photo, it connects to this tree on this side quite quickly, but on the other side over here, there's a lot of open edge to this tree. You can see the branches out pretty much 2/3 of the way down. So you can see this side of it quite a bit. And there's a much shorter tree next to it. So you can see the edges of both those quite a bit. Connect it to your tape though. When you come to your tape, don't leave too much space. Now the next tree, you can actually see, it's one of the ones where you can actually see the tree trunk. It's very few that you can see the tree trunk. So I want to put that with my very, very thin liner brush. I want to put that tree trunk in that you can see. Maybe with my thin liner brush, I'm going to do the top of that tree. It's much more sparse, and I think that's the reason you can see a lot of the tree trunk. The branches are not as thick, and that is so nice when you have all these thick branches on these other trees. It's so nice to have a break for the eye and have one that is less branched. Still, as you get down, the branches are a bit thicker, and at the bottom it's overtaken by a mass of other trees. So again, as you get to the bottom, do connect. And I've got my little tiny brush in my hand, so I just want to go back and do a few miniature details on some of these, just to, and I'm just going to pull it over a little bit. And I'm going to grab my number 1 brush, a nice thin one, because right here is where I want to have a little bit of a break with some shorter trees, so I can see that misty area. Now they are shorter in the photo, but I am emphasizing the shortness so that I can see some of my misty area. Maybe inventing one there that doesn't exist, just because I want to have it connect at the bottom. if you don't have a tree in the photo that fits, pick one to invent. You know, just pick one and paint it where it isn't. Just so that your picture fits. And of course my painting is much longer than her photo, so I have to invent a little bit going on. And I want to see this mist, so I'm making them a little bit shorter than they are in the photo. A couple of little tiny ones here. I'm going to invent one here that doesn't exist in the photo, just because I'm going to have to stretch it out a little bit. And because I want to see some of that mist. Now I'm going to go up a little bit higher. Even my number one feels very thick. This one's kind of, I am now doing a tree I can see. It's fairly tall. It has kind of a part of the tree up here, and then there's a bit of a space. And then it kind of gets a bit thicker down here. And of course, when I want to connect, I'm going to grab my bigger brush to get some of that in. This is my hand right now with all my brushes. Grab my number one again because I want some nice thin treetops. And even my number one brush, I can shove it down into that paint and it'll put the paint on really well. All right, got another tall one here. If you feel a little dubious about doing your trees, do them on a piece of scrap paper and just practice a few. They don't have to be perfect, just, you know, the general shape that you see. Don't forget to go up and down though, you know, tall, not so tall, peaks and valleys. Dip into your dark paint mix frequently. Look at your photo. Really going to help you. Now I'm getting to that V in the valley now, where I want this kind of deep V here, where I'm coming up to a taller tree over here. Oh, this number one brush is putting down huge amounts of paint. I need to try my 000 maybe. So this is what I mean about the V coming down here, where I have a tall tree up here and they just connect right at the bottom of that V. The next tree to it, I can see the trunk of the next tree, and it comes above this area here. So I'll put that in. Of course, the branch is going to come over it, but that doesn't matter. We've got to get it in first, and we've got to get it in so that we have this lovely up and down, this V, and then this height. This tree is a little bit more sparse than the one beside it. You can see a little bit more of it. And then of course come down to the bottom, grab some more paint, connect them at the bottom. Now those are the two taller ones, and then they get a little smaller again just here. Oh boy, I can't believe this brush is just dobs the paint right on. It's only a number zero. That's all right, we'll work with it. We'll turn it into a tree. Just grabbing a little bit more indigo rather than just wet paint. And we've got a tree that's a little bit off to the side here. I just got it leaning sideways a little bit and push my painting along a little bit. Now, if I do all of this dark trees down here before these trees, I will have to dry this, or I can put this tree in now and then finish these afterwards. I'm just going to put it in now. I have to make sure that this tree is finished as a tree, not just, not just a line, so that if it dries before I get down here, that's fine, it's finished as a tree. But what I want to do is work on this big tall tree and finish the bottom after I've got the tall tree, and I've put in a tree beside it, like a fir tree. I'm going to pull back a little bit. I think I want to use my script liner because it is useful for pulling downwards to get a nice straight, controlled straight line. I'm going to roll that in this dark paint. I'm going to grab a bit more indigo, so I want it good and dark. And I'm going to do the trunk first. Tip of my brush at the top here, it's kind of a crooked trunk. I've got the thinness at the top, and like I said, if you prefer to use a pen for this, if you don't feel confident with a brush, then use a pen if that's going to be easier for you. Now as the trunk comes down, it gets thicker, so I can push my brush hairs down a little bit more. I'm probably going to have to do a layer beside that. Go slowly. I want it to get thicker as it comes down. Don't make it too thick, it has to look elegant. I'm going to take it right to my tape, and I'm going to do some like tree shapes beside it so it doesn't look too weird. You don't want it to just kind of be isolated as a straight line. I want it to meet this greenery at the bottom here. And of course there's lots of branches going to happen. Right, deep breath. I've got that in. I'm not going to put any more paint on the brush. The paint is kind of running out, but it won't be so difficult to control now, because there's these, with just the very hairs at the tip of that brush and very little paint on it now, I can put in these very, very thin branches, dead probably branches, at the top here. A few dots on them where there might be a few needles or something left. Kind of curves over at the top. Has a bit of a wiggle in the middle. Now I don't want to put any paint on my brush yet. I'm going to paint with it until it runs out of paint. Just the tip, just the hairs at the tip are going on the paper. One branch at a time. These branches have like little tiny wisps on them that go kind of backwards like that. You want me to come in a little bit more and see a little better? Now what I mustn't do, I'm getting a little bit more paint on my brush now. I mustn't do all of the right hand side here and then go back to the left, because I'll smush it. I must remember that I've got to do the left hand side first. Now, like I said, your brain will look at the mass of branches and get utterly overwhelmed by it. So don't look at the mass. Go one branch at a time and just look at that branch. We've got one coming down here, and then we got one coming out here. I'm only looking at these branches, nothing else. Just not going to confuse my brain. And again, these branches have those bits coming backwards. There's a bit of a space. Very, very thin one here, and barely touching the paper with my brush. I think I might have invented one there that's not there, but that doesn't matter in the least. No, I think it's there. I think it's just comes out a bit further than I drew it, that's all. And there's a really bare one comes down here. Now I'm going to grab my 0.05 one. I'm just going to show you what a pen line would look like, because you can use your pen. It's much easier to control than the brush. And you may just find it much, much easier. It's going to look fine if you prefer to use the pen. I actually prefer to use the brush, but I'm just showing you what it looks like. And it's certainly much, much easier for these wispy little edges to the branches that come sort of backwards. But I like using the brush. I'm going to grab a little bit more paint on it. As the branches leave the tree, they are a little bit thicker. I kind of like the ones that are a weird shape. This one's a bit of a weird shape. And some of them, they just come down like this. And you know what the brain does at this point when it has this mass? It gives up. It says, I can't figure that out. I'm just going to do a bunch of lines and rush through it. Try not to do that. Try to give your brain a good talking to and tell it to be quiet and just go one branch at a time. Your brain will settle down eventually, and it won't give you such a hard time about rushing and getting done. And this is where you take your time. This is the time-consuming part of the painting, is getting all of these beautiful, beautiful shaped branches in. All going in different directions, and we haven't even put things on them yet, like on one of them here there's some dead leaves or something. Dead needles, something like that. So at some point you're going to be putting little blobs on where there's a bit of debris left on a sort of a dead tree. If you miss some branches out, that doesn't matter. Nobody in the world knows what this tree looks like. You can invent some of the shapes, just don't rush them. As you come further down the trunk and closer to the trunk, like I said, they do get thicker. So I'm doing a couple of layers as they come out from the trunk. And some, of course, are thin. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little break from that whole mass there, and I'm going to work on two branches that I can see quite clearly that come way out. They're going to give me sort of a place of reference. They come way out here. And once I get these two in and as a kind of a reference, it'll help me sort through the rest. There's one here. And this one has quite a lot of debris on the end, whatever that is. Little needles or something. And then it has some of those very thin, backwards facing sort of branches, and they have a bit of, I think it's needles on the end. And there's a few more here. I can see now behind there, there's some that do that. And then there's a lot of sort of debris here. That's why this helps me find my way. So that's that one. Now there's another one that comes way out. So I put that big one in to help me with what I'm doing. And that has a bit of debris on the end. That's a regular Sunday afternoon call. And no, I'm really just paying attention to the reference photo now, so that I know where everything's going. Putting all these bits on this branch. Because all this area behind these big branches is quite difficult to figure out. There is a big branch that comes down behind them, kind of disappears into the scenery here. Got a big blob. Grab a Kleenex. Suck up this big blob of paint. I might have to put a few leaves there. Now this tangle of branches gets much more dense as it comes down the tree. And it sort of is going to disappear into all of this silhouette down here. There's this big branch here. And we can come and put some silhouette over the top of all of this to tie it all in. Now we don't need to get too fussed about all of the branches. I'm going to take my little tiny zero brush, and a lot of this area has got that kind of dead needles or something on it. So using little just dabby strokes. Can start putting in a few of those sort of dead needles or bits. And they help to fill up a lot of this space at the bottom here. So you don't need to do every single tiny weeny little branch. Or if you like, when it's all dry, you can go back with your very thin pen and you can put in a few more, you know, wiggly tiny branches. Just looking up here, there's a little bit of debris up here. I think that's enough for a small painting on that side. And then I'll move over to the other side. It's especially good to get the ones at the top of the tree in accurately, because they're rather beautiful how they form. Get a good wiggle in some of them. You notice the general direction of a lot of these branches is down. Sometimes they go down, and sometimes they go down and out. And again, as they come closer to the base of the tree, there's a lot more tangle going on. And we can fill that up with the dead needles. We don't have to do every single branch. It can get a bit tedious sometimes. Unless you want to, but it may be something that you want to come back to tomorrow if you want to sort of play filling in extra branches. Even inventing some branches. And of course, when we get down here, we're going to fill all the base area in with some other trees. And we also have areas we have to fill in with the dead needles over here, little blobs, some dead branches that cross behind. And these are going to connect to another tree that I've put here. I've sort of moved the other tree over a little bit. What I'll do is I'll add just a few more bits and pieces to the tree later when the rest is dry. What I want to do for you is get the rest in before our time is up. So in the photo, right off the edge of the photo, there's a big fir tree here. So I have moved my fir tree a little bit closer because I don't want it right at the edge of the composition. I want it down a little, not as high as the dead tree beside it, or whatever branchy tree beside it. And I don't want it too detailed. I've started with my number 0 brush, then I'm going to switch to my number 6 brush as I go down the tree to get it a bit more abstract. I don't want it too detailed. And it has to meet the other tree coming towards the base of the tree down here. And then I've got to have, towards the base here, I have to have some more trees down in the valley here. So I can put those in now. I'm using the little brush to put the tree tops in, connect them to you know, what's going on with this tree. And the nice thing is when I reach the base of this here, I can just really just fill it in with some broad brush strokes. And the other thing I want is, I don't want to I hate an empty space at the edge of a painting. I'm going to have, just like the photograph, I'm going to have a bit of a tree going off to the edge here. It's not going to be as tall as the tree next to it, and there's definitely going to be some space between them. But as I come down near the base, I'm nearly out of paint. Just about lasted to that end there. So I want to have the edge filled in. Let's pull back a little bit so you can see what I mean. So that gives a nice border to the painting. And once I've got that all in with my big brush, I can always go back with my smaller brush and just add a few little details. And if you don't know what to do, you know, with the edge of your sort of dead tree here, that's great. You can just connect it to your big fir tree and forget all about the mess that's around that tree, all the branches and so forth, and cover it up with what you've got there. Right, I'm going to give a quick whir with the hairdryer because I want to take the tape off. I like to do the final reveal with the tape taken off. Give me a second with the hairdryer. Right, let's take the tape off, get the messy sides out of there. And I know you're all probably still working on your tree branches, and that's okay. Sometimes it's good to have a break for a few hours or a day and come back and fill in a little bit of that detail. It does take a lot of time. And sometimes if you're tired, your brain does not want to cope with that much detail. It just wants a break. So do what you feel like doing. I actually signed mine with some white paint, I think, because it's all dark. I've got some PH Martin's white here. See what I can achieve. See if I can get my name on there without making a horrible mess. Yeah, I'll do it over here. We've got a lot of space. There we go. I just used a little bit of PH Martin's white because it's very dark and I won't be able to see any other kind of signature there. Probably should have taken more time with that, but that's okay. Put that away, and there we go.